Hi, I'm George Crump, lead analyst with Storage Switzerland. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about unstructured data and how to stop the insanity that it causes when it just grows out of control. To help me with the conversation, I've invited David Surf. He is the Executive Vice President at Crossroads. David, how you doing?
I'm doing good, George.
Good. So David, let's talk about this. You know, when we see, you know, there's no problem finding a statistic that talks about how badly data is growing in the environment, right? When I get briefed on something and somebody says, oh, data is growing, I feel like pounding my head against this very whiteboard, right? But I mean, if we look at how customers are dealing with this problem, they generally one of two answers today. For some reason, we still all want to use disk to store all this data because we're worried about getting it back on time and meeting customer demands and things like that. So what we typically see is two things. One is they start with NAS 1 and they keep going to NAS N. And of course the problem with that is each one of these has to be managed separately, and you got to set up different users and all that different stuff you have. And then I think the next thing we're also seeing is, and I clearly this is starting to be adopted, is more of a scale out model, where really what we do is take that exact same approach, except we interconnect these, and then to the user we're presenting a sort of a single point. So essentially you have a single point of management, a single point of everything. So in some areas this should simplify things, but we still have a pretty good cost issue because we're still buying the same number of spindles, we're really buying the same amount of hardware. All we've really done with scale out is sort of simplified the management construct. When you guys are encountering people, how are you guys proposing to solve these problems?
So, and you did say disk, it's actually, then we're starting to see flash, so it's really interesting.
Good point,
right?
Yeah.
And what we're really looking at is these are fantastic for providing high performance. When we're talking about intense computation or analytics, ideal that we want to keep it up here on a high performance tier. Your point is that as it grows, what we're doing now is we're keeping a lot of content on something that's fairly expensive, and the chance of ever touching that data again is fairly slim. So you're paying for something that's very difficult to manage just from this complexity here, and it costs you a lot of money.
Right. I mean, a lot of the results we see right now is probably 80 to 90% of data that's on this type of infrastructure, once it's sort of gone through its initial phase, right, of creation, quick edits, done, never gets touched again.
Right, and it doesn't dedupe either. So a lot of this data, so you really don't have any economy. So what you really have to look at is what's going to change that paradigm. And what we need to look at are other storage mediums that can actually help you get to a better cost. So when we look at Strongbox, it'll actually fit in here. Instead of scaling these out in this way, or even going out and in, it can be added because Strongbox behaves and acts just like these disks, but it's going to unleash an economic value that we get from tape.
How would that architect into this?
Well, Strongbox would just be added in here to work seamlessly with your existing NAS infrastructure. So one of the things that's nice about Strongbox, it's not a rip and replace, it's a complement.
Okay.
So keep the right amount of disk with the right amount of Strongbox to balance your environment and get to a price point that makes sense. So in this case, let's say that these are NetApp environments.
Okay.
We actually can tie back into the APIs that come native in a NetApp, and NetApp is now smart enough to write into the Strongbox. My handwriting is not as pretty as yours, George. So now the Strongbox is going to look just like a standard NFS or CIF share.
Okay.
And so files can now be seamlessly managed here, where it maintains actually a single namespace. All of this is very seamless. Now what's nice about this is we're going to free up that expensive capacity here and return usable disk storage back to your applications. So where you've spent your big dollars, either in flash, disk, whatever it may be, you'll be able to maintain more of that and keep your applications working seamlessly with a storage tier that acts and behaves just like any other disk that you're adding to your environment. But there's some intelligence here that keeps things moving back and forth seamlessly.
So if I'm a user out here and I go to access a file that's been moved to Strongbox, its retrieval, I might notice a performance difference as it comes back, probably not, but the overall interaction is seamless to me.
That's right. So one of the things that's nice about the Strongbox is we let you tune the performance. So you can actually tune it to being where it looks just like disk and you wouldn't notice any type of latencies or behavior. Or if it's really something I don't know if I'm ever going to need it again, I could turn the dial the other way and get to more of the economic value and maybe take a little bit of a performance hit, but it's tunable. So what we can actually do is meet each application's requirement, tune it based on what you want, and even do it in real time. So some data starts where it's important, and over time may degrade and then come back being important again. Right? We see that in project flows.
Sure.
So the Strongbox actually is intelligent enough to be able to be tuned that way. Keep it hot for a while, bring it cold, and if it comes back, it's hot again. And that works seamlessly back to your application.
And then so to drive down costs, though, what are you doing behind the scenes on the Strongbox to make that happen?
So what we're doing is we are managing the way we combine disk and tape underneath the Strongbox to present it as a single layer of storage. So the user doesn't have to think about where data is sitting. It's always protected, it's always available, and it's all managed in a seamless layer from the Strongbox.
Okay, so well, hang on a second there, because as soon as you hear tape, everybody that's watching just went, right? And so there's two types of tape people out there. There are guys that have tape and they're probably using it for backup, so they're gonna want to know, how do I integrate that in, right? And then there's another group of guys that have just hated tape for some reason and thrown the whole thing out, and they don't have any tape at all. How do we address those two types of people?
So let's add that to your diagram, because typically if we have a large environment like this, there's some layer of data protection, and mirroring is not data protection, right? So let's put either a layer of tape down here. So you already own some tape. You're actually understand the value of tape from a backup perspective. And backup is great, again, for these things where they're changing daily. We need snapshots, we need some other stuff. Maybe we're snapping to disk and then disk off to tape, and that's a very common thing that we see. But what we can do is we can actually retask part of your tape and leverage that investment that you already have and improve the ROI on your overall environment. So Strongbox is an appliance. You just add our box to this environment. We can leverage and use disk you already own, so you can get more economic value out of what you've already capitalized. And the same with tape. We would partition your library and use that, and all of that's under our abstraction layer as our application. Think of us as middleware, right? We're now going to manage that and then just present that. So now we've optimized some investment that you already have, and still brought this power of all file-based access versus backup being blocked.
Sure. So for this guy, even if it has been moved to tape, the interaction is still seamless, right? I make the request and it comes back. Now again, in tape it might be a little slower, but it does come back and I can get to my data and things like that.
Right. So what we're doing, again, if you think about that tape when we say slower, when you use an intelligent layer, we're going to control the behavior off that tape, so it may not even seem like latency. It may look like a file coming down off the internet. It's coming, right, and you're waiting for the end of file. But that's what you can turn the dial on the Strongbox to control. How fast.
So it's almost like a caching mechanism.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's talk about the other guy, though, the guy that hates tape. What do you do for him?
So the guys that said, hey, we want tape out of here. Well, there are probably two reasons that they've gotten tape out. First of all, tape was difficult to manage. Applications were having issues. You might have had your backup fail, and you're like, hey, I hate this thing. Let's get it out of here. And you were convinced to go with a tapeless data protection model. Or two, you didn't like the physical nature of tape, where we were physically touching media, having to send it off to Iron Mountain, and that whole process. And so a
lot of people and time involved there.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are the most common reasons. It's not that tape was a terrible thing. Tape as a technology is incredibly reliable and very economical, of course. What we're going to bring to that is a touchless concept, right? So just like we have disk here and racks of disk, and no one's going and just ripping hard drives out unless the drives failed, right? It's touchless. We can do the exact same thing with the Strongbox to where it's touchless. So what you end up having is, here's your rack of disk, and we know all how that works, and we just stack them up. And then we have a rack of the Strongbox, which is a combination of tape and disk, all seamless. These are closed, nothing to touch, and there's back-end built-in replication in Strongbox, so it can still send data off-site if you're trying to run a DR or some other concept of I want multiple shared data centers of the same environment. Strongbox can do the same thing you do with disk. So in this case, it again looks just like disk.
So then where exactly does tape fit into this touchless environment for this guy? Does he go buy a library and put it in that rack and you guys just manage it?
So if he's gotten rid of his tape and he's currently now there's no tape infrastructure, we would bring in the appliance and a new library, and you'd rack it and just close the door and never touch it again, right?
Okay.
So fill it up with the capacity. And what's beautiful about libraries is the densities today are so incredible with the way tape can operate. Particularly, we just saw IBM bring out 10 terabyte tape cartridges.
Right.
Looking at massive densities and at an economic that is just an order of magnitude different than disk.
Okay,
right?
and so one of the reasons he'd have to vault it then would be to touch the tape would be to vault it to get it off site. And what you're saying with your replication function, I can have this same set of racks in another facility replicate and have a touchless environment over there as well.
So that would be absolutely the touchless. So here is a Strongbox sitting here, S-Box Prime, and we'd have that S-Box secondary, and we would go over a WAN and provide asynchronous replication between systems, touchless. But what's also an option now is, depending on the type of data, a lot of companies want 3 copies, 4 copies, 5
Sure.
copies. And doing that on disk can be even more expensive. It compounds this general problem you started with.
Right.
So with tape, you could write 2, 3 copies and physically take a tape out if you wanted to.
Right.
Right. So it's up to the user now.
Well, and
Where's the economics?
And the modern tape library, you could have it drop into a box, essentially, that's a shippable container that you could just get right out.
Absolutely, you certainly could, and just send that off to Iron Mountain as you might want, or into your own second data center.
Okay, great. Well, David, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, George.
I'm George Crump, lead analyst with StorageSwiss. Thank you for joining us.